This one's totally different. Thank you. Well, you know, I just can't tell you how moving it is to receive such an award from people that I don't even know very well and I've not worked closely with. You know, you can just imagine how special that is. I do know Annie Laurie Gaylor, and we've worked over the years on reproductive rights for women, and she's one of my heroines as well. I really want to thank the board of the American Humanist Association and Roy and the staff members that I've met, Eric and Jess and Patrick and Steve and Leslie, who's taking photographs, really great people, and especially the Feminist Caucus, who I was able to meet with yesterday. How important is it to have a Feminist Caucus in the year 2012? I think I'm going to talk about that. You can't imagine how important it is. This is the first time I've been in New Orleans in my life under such happy circumstances. I was here in 1995 defending abortion providers. I was here after the storm in 2005, and I was here in 2010 in the aftermath of the oil disaster, which we haven't talked about, but what an assault on the earth, what an assault on humanity BP unleashed with that, and I'm certain that it is not over. This is also the first time I have to say I've received an award that I didn't feel conflicted about. I did get an award from Nixon, and for many years after that, even though it was a huge event that day in the news, I felt very conflicted because this was 1970, so you all who were alive then remember that was the year that Nixon invaded Cambodia. And I received this award from him exactly 6 months to the day after, the first day that he was available to the international press, because he had been hiding out for 6 months. And, you know, I was 19, so I thought all the press coverage was really about me. But, of course, it was the first chance for the international press and even the national press to talk to Nixon. And I didn't know what I was going to say to Nixon. My original inclination had been to refuse such an award. But then, you know, there's pressure. Your family, and it's the president. We hate him, but he's the president. So you've got to go. And I did go, and I found my strength in that moment because Nixon gave it to me. He ranted on about how I was not one of these hippie protesters that was out in the streets. I was one of the good kids. And of course, I have been at a protest against the war nearly every day for the last few years. So he gave me my voice, ironically, and what I learned, and I'm happy to convey this to everybody my age and younger. The actions of one person at specific times can make a huge and tremendous difference. People need to see us, even if we are one person speaking out. It is so important to say what you know is true, and especially it's important to say it to people in power. So that's what I took from the experience. And the other thing I'll say about being someone who's fought for peace is I was fortunate enough to have come of age in the 1960s. I was fortunate enough to have Fannie Lou Hamer sharing the other bed in my little bedroom when she would come up to Madison from Mississippi. People my age and older know that she was the leader of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, a sharecropper who had nearly been beaten to death for attempting to register to vote in the early 60s. And this was one of my role models and one of the people from whom I learned that even if you're nearly beaten to death, it means something to stand on your principles. And I was fortunate to be a part of the 60s. And the 60s was what? A worldwide revolutionary movement when we thought all things were possible. And we weren't going to put up with the patriarchy. We weren't going to put up with white supremacy, with global imperialism. We were going to stop it. And we felt this tremendous unity all over the world with people like ourselves, which I must say I have held on to, and I was fortunate enough to find a movement for revolution in the world and leadership, which I've learned a great deal from. I've also learned that because the world is the way it is right now, there's nothing inevitable about it at all. It's just the way it is. Human beings do not have to live in this class-divided, caste-divided, patriarchal setup with all this religious ignorance and intolerance. Our minds are capable of much more. We can truly rise above this, and yes, as Cenk said yesterday, it is going to take a revolution. And I am proud to be part of that, in unity with the people all over the world who are thinking the same thing. So this is the world we're in, and I am not going to subject you to all of what I delivered this morning when we were talking about the U.S. war on terror. I do thank all of you who came. It was quite a good opportunity to put some things on the table about what we're facing in 2012. And just to be brief, the presentation was a look at the role of indefinite detention by our government carried out in our name in a sustained basis, not closing Guantanamo, and imprisoning probably 6,000 men in a U.S. prison in Afghanistan called Bagram, where the men have no habeas corpus rights at all. Part of our U.S. war on terror. The bigger part is the what I would call illegitimate, unjust, and immoral wars themselves, which are actually not being wound down by Obama. When I talked to Cenk after his speech last night, he reminded me that President Obama, in fact, did not want to remove troops from Iraq, and the only reason that he was forced to is that it was the compliant Iraqi government that refused to let U.S. troops stay, otherwise they might still be there. Afghanistan, what did President Obama do? And of course it's not him as an individual, it is President Obama as the leader of an empire. He expanded the troops in Afghanistan by a factor of 3, over 100,000 troops. And every year, since he's been president, the death toll of civilians, Afghan civilians, has increased. I want to talk to you about the unity between the U.S. war on the world, a global war on terror, and a global war on women. People will say to me in the peace movement, how can you possibly be for peace and against killing and be an ardent defender of abortion rights for women? Well, I'll tell you why. Because women are human beings, and if you take away our ability to control our own bodies, we become nothing but enslaved. It's just that simple. There's a global war on women. It has to do with access to health care. It has to do with what our own government is doing. I was an opponent of George Bush and Laura Bush's argument that the U.S. should go into Afghanistan to save the poor women from the Taliban. The Taliban, the warlords, were terrible. That's indisputable. In 2001, Afghanistan was the second most dangerous country on this globe for a woman to give birth in terms of maternal mortality. Fast forward to 2011. 10 years later, billions of dollars spent. Afghanistan is now the most dangerous country in the world for a woman to give birth. This is what this war has brought for people that we were told we were saving. The Afghan people want us out of there. They will have to find the ways to deal with the Taliban and the warlords alike, but they can't do it under occupation. The other news this week, in terms of the effect on human beings, is that now the suicide rate among active duty U.S. military has surpassed the rate of deaths in combat. It's one a day, killing themselves because they have been forced to participate in these illegitimate wars of plunder. This is unbearable to me, in the same way that we heard dozens and dozens of babies were dying in Afghanistan last winter in the refugee camps because they weren't kept warm enough. The parents had no means to keep them warm enough. This is an unbearable situation that we have a huge responsibility to raise our voices against. The organization that I direct, The World Can't Wait, has a slogan that we developed this year: humanity and the planet come first. This was before I knew I was getting this award, by the way. Humanity and the planet come first. Stop the crimes of our government. And we're really directing all of our energies at the people living in this country. Frankly, citizens and immigrants alike. Everybody, to take responsibility, to raise our voices, and to take action to stop what's being done in our name. And what's the connection to the global war on women? I mentioned the attack on reproductive rights around the world. One of the most incredible things to me in this day and age is that you probably have 800,000 to 1 million women being sexually trafficked every year. Many of them coming into this country. They're coming right around the corner from the World Can't Wait office on 7th Avenue in Manhattan, in Chelsea. We know this from news reports. Little girls being trafficked, an epidemic of violent pornography. This is what I am concerned about in terms of what's in people's heads right now. The 17-year-old boys who are growing up on a diet of violent internet porn that only makes more graphic what all of us women know and feel every day. That in essence, much of the world looks at us as sexual objects that should be available to men at any time. This is why pornography and prostitution do so much damage in the service of patriarchy. This is not human nature, my friends. This is trained behavior. This is unacceptable. It is intolerable, and is something that we can actively struggle against, especially with the people coming behind us, especially with the young girls. And yes, with the young men too. We have that responsibility. How do we do it? We stand up and say that women's bodies are worth something. In Louisiana yesterday, the governor signed yet another law restricting abortion. What is the state legislature telling women here? You're going to have to wait even longer after your forced ultrasound if you want to terminate a pregnancy to talk to a doctor. Well, of course we want to talk to doctors if we're terminating pregnancies. Do we want to be forced to do that? As if we're too ignorant to make our own decisions? Absolutely not, and this is happening in state after state. Abstinence-only education no sex education. All of this is contributing, and of course it's coming from the Christian theocrats in our government that have taken posts all the way from the local up into the federal government. And yes, Obama's Office of Faith-Based Initiatives has done just as much harm as those years under the Bush regime. This is warping people's minds, lowering women's sights so dramatically that all they can be focused on is their relationship to a potential fetus. These are things that we can change, and we must. This empire has set itself up as unchallengeable, but we are the force that is the only force possible to challenge it. I just wanted to mention, because we're in Louisiana as well, and I have a love for the people here, that we are sitting in a state that is now the prison house of the globe. You saw the special from the Times-Picayune in the last few weeks. Louisiana has the highest prison rate of anywhere in the world. 11 times that of Iran, the theocrats in Iran, the mullahs putting people away, and 16 times that of China, which is a fascist police state in its own right now. People are getting locked up and never getting out in this state. And most of them are black, and increasingly, they are black women. This is a virulent hatred that is being put on the people who have the least access to education and the least access to get out of prison through good legal representation. All of this matters because these are, need it be said, human beings. This matters because American lives are not more important than anyone else's lives. This matters because our president has a kill list now, and we all know about it. Picking out people in Yemen, Pakistan, Somalia, Afghanistan to be assassinated by drones. I know because I've met with legal activists from Pakistan that they suspect hundreds and hundreds of civilians have been killed in this process, and we can name 175 children who have been killed by these drones, not one of which is justified. I don't care how big a military infrastructure there is, it cannot justify the murder of innocents in our name. Women everywhere degraded, demeaned, and brutalized in this global war on women. And yes, a lot of this emanates from the United States. This is industrialized commodification of women. I applaud AHA for having a feminist caucus. Do you know how many other organizations think this question is settled and have not looked at this global war on women, the wasting of women's bodies, literally? You are a very special group of people with whom I hope to work much more closely in the future and to make friends and colleagues of many of you. I wanted to raise one more issue, and I think many of you may have read about this in the Humanist last year. This is the case of Gregory Koger, who's a young man in Chicago who did 10 years in prison as a youth. He got involved in gangs and got in the system. He was even in solitary confinement for years. And this is a young white man. He was released from prison, really turned his life around. He got involved in progressive politics, went to work for a lawyer, started helping other people get out of jail. And he got connected up with a movement to stop this mass incarceration. I met him when he came in 2009 to film a protest that we did in Nebraska for Dr. Leroy Carhart, who replaced Dr. George Tiller, who himself was assassinated just 3 years ago in Wichita, Kansas, for providing abortions. This is when I met Gregory. But just a few months later, Gregory was arrested when the revolutionary speaker and writer Samsara Taylor was speaking at the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago. Many of you probably know her work from the Secular Student Alliance. She's spoken very extensively on women's liberation. She was set to speak at the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago. For unknown reasons, suddenly at the last minute, her talk was canceled. And she went to just announce, hey, we're going to move my talk to one of the members' houses. The members were quite upset about this cancellation. And what transpired was the Skokie Police Department came in to monitor the situation. Gregory had his iPhone videotaping Samsara's short announcement, and he was thrown to the floor of the vestibule and beaten severely by the Skokie Police Department. Later, through a trial, convicted of still relatively minor misdemeanors of trespassing and resisting arrest, which of course, if you remember the Vietnam days, you always get charged with resisting arrest when you are beat up by the police. Gregory was convicted and given a sentence of 300 days in prison for these misdemeanors, which is almost unheard of. We are still fighting this case, and I'm proud to be one of his supporters. At a table in the back, we have some copies of a statement that you may sign, and I wish you would sign to try to get this conviction overturned. I think that's the only ethical, humanist, moral thing to do. And I wanted to mention that Dr. Antonio Martinez, who used to run the Center for the Treatment of Torture Survivors in Chicago, sent a letter saying, it's difficult for me to understand how Mr. Koger, a survivor of torture and a person that I know and admire for his high standards of social morality and humanism, can be accused of these charges. He was simply acting as the videographer for Ms. Taylor, who was disinvited from the event by the pressure of corporate America. In fact, the video taken by Gregory on November 1st contradicts completely the statements and accusations made against him prior to the trial by the Ethical Humanist Society of Chicago president. I am really disappointed at this incident, and I know that other members of the EHSC were also. It came to my attention that several members of the EHSC, including board members, left the organization because of this obvious moral contradiction. A moral response to this unfortunate event can be a courageous denouncement by the new EHSC leadership of these false accusations against Gregory, and a public call for these false charges to be reversed and dropped. I think these times call for a lot of moral clarity. I have heroes, including people in this room. One of my biggest heroes is the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, who has said many times that the means and the ends of any movement for a revolution must be completely consistent. The means and ends must be consistent. And I refer a lot to something he wrote. There is a place where epistemology and morality meet. There is a place where you have to stand and say, it's not acceptable to refuse to look at something or to refuse to believe in something because it makes you uncomfortable. And it is not acceptable to believe something just because it makes you comfortable. We're living brothers and sisters in the biggest empire in the history of the world, the biggest military might ever marshaled. We're told it's in our name. It's being done to keep us safe. And I believe that we, in this country, have to send a very different message as loudly and persistently as we can. That we care about all the people of the world, and that our government is not acting in our interests or in our name when they carry on these assaults that are illegitimate, unjust, and immoral. And I want to say that it's been a pleasure and a moving delight to meet you and to be with Gloria and Cenk. And I don't know if I see Jessica or Damon. They may be here. With George, with the amazing Randy. To be in your community and to accept this award. And I shall do my very best to keep on this mission of standing up against the power and fighting to change things for the better. Viva la revolución.